welcome back Dr. Steve Poland and Dr. Paul Smith. They are both founding members of CAP, the Center for Applied Positive Psychology, located here in Albuquerque. And we are really excited to hear what you have to share with us today about flourishing and resilience. So with that, I will hand it over to you guys.
Well, great. Thank you very much, Tammy. I'm Paul Smith, and Steve and I are really happy to be here. We really appreciate the fact that New Mexico New and Project Echo are hosting this, and we want to welcome and thank all of the participants who have joined us today. So we'll be talking about flourishing as the foundation for greater resilience. And this is a presentation that's similar to one that we gave in November, where flourishing was used as kind of the springboard for effective and successful retirement. So those of you who joined us for that presentation, please be sure that we've got new material. So hopefully we've got enough new material that this will keep your interest. And those of you who didn't join us, don't worry, this is a standalone presentation. If you didn't see that presentation, we've structured this so that you'll easily be able to follow along. So resilience is something that we felt was represented well by the picture that we've got here. And what we have is, trees where their roots are intermingled, where they're part of a forest, and they're near a stream or a river. And what this shows is that in nature, there are networks and interconnections between individuals. And those individuals are part of networks and systems that allow them to be more resilient. And you'll see that that theme of being part of something larger, being part of systems, and relying on those systems is an important part of being resilient. But first, we'd like to start by introducing ourselves. So Steve, can you talk about your background?
Sure can, Paul. Looking back on my life and career, I realized that I've frequently chosen to surround myself with resilient individuals. As a Peace Corps volunteer in the 1960s on the Caribbean island of Grenada, my neighbor and friend Sebastian was an amazingly resilient young man. While financially supporting his mother and two younger sisters, he graduated only post-secondary school on the island, the Teachers College, and became principal of the largest primary school. Later, he would immigrate to the United States. In the 1970s, while living in the Navajo Nation, I worked to help the effort to reopen and refund a program for mentally handicapped Navajo children, a program that's still in operation today. My partner in this effort was the school's director, Art, a decorated war veteran. Without Art's deep connection with his traditional Navajo beliefs and his community, we would not have been able to complete this mission. It was at the University of Minnesota, where I completed my graduate training in the 1980s, that some of the pioneering research in the field of resilience was done. Today, we'll talk about the work of one of those researchers, Dr. Ann Maston. Retirement from my career as a rural school psychologist has given me the opportunity to share my knowledge of well-being and resilience, and in a new way. I have taught classes on well-being and resilience through the Division of Continuing Education at the University of New Mexico. I'm delighted to share my insights today with my colleague, Paul Smith.
Thanks, Steve. And so you'll see that my background is not steeped in psychology education. And so I feel very lucky to have been able to develop this presentation with Steve, who really is an expert on resilience. And I think you're lucky that he's here to help guide this discussion. So I have a PhD in engineering from Cornell University. I also have an MBA from the University of New Mexico. I worked as a scientist, a business negotiator, and a manager at Sandia National Laboratories for 28 years. And I personally came to positive psychology, which is, you'll see, is the foundation for what we're talking about, through depression and anxiety. Positive psychology, along with traditional psychological treatments, helped bring me out of depression and anxiety, and helped me build resources that allow me to be resilient. And so those are the things that really brought me to resilience. I found positive psychology to be so helpful in my own life that with others at Sandia, we taught positive psychology, not as a corporate initiative, but just as something that we felt was important. And we reached almost 400 people while I was there. 2 years ago, I retired from Sandia, and now one of my primary focuses is to bring positive psychology to a broader audience. And so I'm really glad to be here with you and with Steve. So Steve, can you talk us through the science of resilience?
Sure can, Paul. The approach that Paul and I take to our presentations on well-being and resilience draw heavily on science. Talk to your neighbor, or open your computer, newspaper, magazine, or a self-help book. You'll find many suggestions about how to increase your resilience and your well-being. The problem is, how do you know if there's evidence to back up these suggestions? Without science, we believe, where ideas are open to scrutiny, we have no way of knowing what we can rely on. So in today's talk, Paul and I are going to call on two of our favorite researchers in the field of resilience. The picture here is of Dr. George Bonanno, and later we'll talk about Ann Maston. Dr. Maston studies the roots of resilience in childhood and adolescence. When we talk about the importance of close, positive relationships in our lives, we'll talk about the research of Dr. Maston. Now, Dr. Bonanno studies adults who have dealt with challenging events like the death of a partner or spouse, or faced the challenges of war, disasters, terrorist attacks like 9/11, and pandemics like COVID-19, what we're going through now. So how do these researchers define resilience? Both agree that to be resilient, a person has to have faced a challenging situation, like a serious injury or a loss of a spouse, and has been able to cope successfully. Their definitions of resilience are similar, involving recovery or maintenance of functioning in the face of stressors. Dr. Bonanno defines resilience as the ability to maintain healthy functioning in the face of a stressor. Dr. Maston's definition is very broad. She suggests that systems as widely divergent as human beings, biological systems, remember that picture of those trees, intermingled trees of supporting each other and interconnected, and also economic systems can all show resilience. These researchers agree that resilience is, in Ann Maston's words, ordinary magic. Resilience is not a quality of a few extraordinary people. Most people, given the right kind of support, can be resilient. Well, why do we need to be resilient? See, I guess it seems pretty obvious, because to flourish in life, we need the ability to regain our footing and our balance in the face of life's hard knocks. The good news is that if we take action to strengthen our sources of well-being, then we also strengthen the protective factors that contribute to our resilience. These techniques are known, and we will share some of them today. Now let's listen to Dr. Bonanno describe his work.
My name is George Bonanno. I'm a professor of clinical psychology at Columbia University Teachers College. I run the Loss, Trauma, and Emotion Lab. I also direct the Teachers College Resilience Center for Veterans and Families. So what I've been doing really for most of my career, going on about 25 years now, is studying human resilience in the face of loss and trauma. Really, we study resilience in the face of any kind of major adversity. We began doing this work by really looking at the groups of people that were typically, most of the focus was on psychopathology, on grief, on PTSD, and we began following large groups of people over time and identifying different patterns of outcome. And we realized as we did this that what we were seeing was that most people, the majority of people exposed to what we consider a traumatic event, show very few symptoms at all. They show basically a healthy profile, a healthy trajectory of functioning over time. They are resilient. They do not become traumatized in any way, shape, or form. They're not happy the event happened. They suffer a little bit, but they're fine and they continue to function. This is most people. And we've now shown this many, many times. Other people have shown this many, many times. This is the primary finding we do, that humans are naturally resilient. It doesn't mean that people are not traumatized. About the same percentage of people are traumatized as you would see any other way. So there are people who develop PTSD. There are people who struggle greatly after these kinds of events, hurricanes, terrorist attacks, major losses, etc. But they are different, show different patterns. And again, as I said before, most people are resilient. So we've been trying to understand why that is. It's a very complicated story, of course. It's always a complicated story. We find there are many different predictors. We also find there are resilient children. Other researchers have shown this, but we see tremendous capacity in humans to bounce back.
And so we'll get into what we mean by resilience and where that term came from. But before that, we'd like you to think back on a time in your life when you dealt with a challenge, when it may not have been traumatic, but something happened that you had to overcome. Think about the techniques that you may have used. Think about the things that helped you. We think that as you remember this experience in your own life, that will help you connect to what we're talking about today. So the term well-being and flourishing was introduced by Martin Seligman, who in the late 1990s was the president of the American Psychological Association. And as part of his tenure, he wanted to focus on bringing people from just getting by to really living their best lives. He felt that there was too much focus in psychology research and in the psychology community on only helping people who were in distress and needed help to get to the point where they were functioning again. And so he came up with what he called positive psychology, and he coined the term flourishing for living your best life. Now, he acknowledged that resilience might very well be an aspect of well-being. It's important. He certainly acknowledged that it's important to well-being, but he didn't identify it as one of the central tenets or central elements of well-being, which Steve will talk about now. Oh, and you're muted, Steve. There you go.
Well, yes, those 5 elements that Dr. Seligman believes contribute to resilience are positive emotions, engagement or flow, positive relationships, meaning and accomplishment. Thus the acronym PERMA. I'm delighted to share today with you the drawing my granddaughter Alex made of these elements. I love her choice of a flower and its petals as a living being that integrates and relies on all these elements of well-being. And if you look really closely at the drawing, you'll see the word resilience written on the stem of the flower. Just think of that flower or the trees in that initial slide we started with. In the midst of a storm, how they flex and bend and bounce back as a reflection of their resilience. And of course, they don't do it alone. There are many other trees and flowers that are also a part of this system that helps them. So when I look at my granddaughter's Alex's drawing, I experience all 5 elements of PERMA. The positive emotions of love and affection I share with Alex and her parents. The sense of engagement I get when we talk about her passion for art or circus arts. The sense of positive connection I have knowing her as an infant and seeing her as she has matured into a young adult. And the meaning I get from having her in my life. And then the sense of accomplishment that I get from recognizing how hard I've worked to make sure that I was present as she grew up. And now let's go through each of these elements of PERMA in more detail and consider how they can contribute to your resilience and how you can build them into your life. So let's talk some about another of my favorite researchers in the field of positive psychology, and her name is Barbara Fredrickson. Much of her research is focused on answering the question, why are positive emotions good for us? What adaptive significance have they had for us during human evolution? While it was clear that negative emotions help us survive life and death situations by triggering rapid responses in our body, the so-called flight or fight reactions to the sight of a predator, the question still remained, what was the function of positive emotions? Her answer is the broaden and build theory of positive emotion. Her research indicates that positive emotions help us build the psychological, social, and physical resources that help us cope with life's challenges, like dealing with our COVID-19 situation or 9/11. Over the short term, positive emotions broaden our view of the world, allowing us to take in more information. Over the long term, they help us build the personal resources like resilience that contribute to our well-being. Now let's hear Dr. Fredrickson tell us how positive emotions accomplish this goal.
Positive emotions fundamentally change the way the human brain works. They allow us to take in more information, kind of widen our lens so we are able to see more in the periphery and to integrate that information in creative and integrative ways. And that is a temporary effect of positive emotions. That's what I call the broaden effect. That comes and goes as readily as a positive emotion comes and goes. But why that's important is that the more of these positive micro moments that you have, they're like nutrients. They accumulate and compound and help build your resources, build your resilience, build your reserves so that you become a better version of yourself. It propels us on a path of growth. And so that's what I call the build effect of positive emotions. These are happening at very different time scales. The broaden is a momentary effect. The build is long-term over weeks and months. So if our positive emotions are frequent in daily life, then we're setting ourselves up to be a better version of ourselves next season.
So these very fast, transient, short-lived emotions, we could miss them.
Oh, easily. In fact, we know from research that many times bad is stronger than good. Negative things just scream at us, and the positive are much more subtle, more like a whisper. And yet there's an interesting complementary asymmetry where positive emotions are much more frequent than negative emotions in people's daily lives, so long as you're not dealing with an affective disorder like depression or anxiety or chronic loneliness. But for most people, positive emotions outnumber their negative emotions. And so if we tune in, if we're more mindful, if we slow down and pay attention to the more subtle aspects of our experience, they're all over the place.
So like all of us, Dr. Fredrickson was devastated by the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers. She recalls wondering if her study of positive emotions made sense in a post-9/11 world. But she quickly rebounded, recalling that she had studied the resilience of a group of college students before the events of 9/11, and she could revisit these students to find out how they had fared after the events of 9/11. It turned out that her work on positive emotions was still very relevant. How did the most resilient students differ from the least resilient ones? It was not the amount of negative emotions they experienced. The most resilient students felt as much anxiety, anger, sadness as the least resilient group. They were not denying the negative. The difference was in the amount of positive emotion they experienced. The most resilient students were able to connect with more sources of positive emotion than the least resilient students. It was this abundance of positive emotion that, in Fredrickson's words, put the brakes on depression's downward spiral?
And so, let's see, there we go. Sorry about that. So how do positive emotions enhance resilience? One of the keys that Fredrickson has identified is that it's important to notice and experience those positive emotions. They can happen without our noticing, they're fleeting. So the graphic that we have here shows that the good things that happen to us, the good experiences we have less weight, if you will, than the negative things. So we need more of them. Fredrickson's research has shown that it's about 3 to 1 is a tipping point for people to be emotionally healthy. So the key is to have those emotions and experience them. And we'll talk about how that helps and why that helps. And with each one of the PERMA elements, we'll have a slide that talks about the effects and the techniques so that you have some ideas about how to enhance that aspect in your life. So as Fredrickson talked about, positive emotions open us up. They actually allow us a larger field of view. They also allow greater creativity by allowing our minds, having our minds give us more options for what we're going to do. So positive emotions give us a broader palette of activities and things that we can do when we need to face a difficulty. Positive emotions over the long term also build our resources so that we have the ability to deal with difficulties and be resilient when the storm comes along. So some techniques for experiencing more positive emotions in your life are listed here. The first one is the 3 good things exercise. And what this is writing down, either as the day goes along or at the end of the day, at least 3 good things that happened to you, 3 things that you enjoyed or took satisfaction in, and also writing down why they happened or how you can get more of those in your life. This does a couple of things. Even on a bad day, it points out to you that good things have happened. But also, after you've done this for a while, it starts to rewire your brain to help you look for those positive things, because at the end of the day, or as the day goes along, you'll have to write them down. So as you notice them, you are more likely to experience them. The other technique isn't quite as easy. It's meditation. It takes more time. But the way meditation helps with positive emotions is, especially with mindfulness meditation, which is focused on being in the present moment, those positive emotions happen and they're fleeting. And if we're in the moment, we are much more likely to notice that they're there, to notice that we've experienced them. So these 2 techniques can help bring more positive emotions into your life. So now we're going to go on with engagement. And here we see Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who did the original work on engagement, and he calls it the engaged life. And we'll hear from him momentarily about what the characteristics of engagement are. But I want to point out that the epitome of engagement is what he calls flow. And if you've ever been in a situation where you've lost track of time, you've had to call a loved one or a colleague and say, I'm really sorry, I'm late for whatever event you're going to do with them. I got lost in my work, or I got lost in what I was doing and just lost track of time. That's flow. And so we'll hear more about flow from Csikszentmihalyi.
Now, when we do studies, we have, with other colleagues around the world, done over 8,000 interviews of people, from Dominican monks to blind nuns to Himalayan climbers to Navajo shepherds who enjoy their work. And regardless of the culture, regardless of education or whatever, there are these 7 conditions that seem to be there when a person is in flow. There's this focus that once it becomes intense, leads to a sense of ecstasy, a sense of clarity, You know exactly what you want to do from one moment to the other. You get immediate feedback. You know that what you need to do is possible to do, even though difficult. And sense of time disappears. You forget yourself. You feel part of something larger. And once those conditions are present, what you're doing becomes worth doing for its own sake.
So Paul, as Paul and I were putting this presentation together, you and I really, I think, experienced flow so many times. It would be like definitely like the hours would go like minutes, and it would be like, oh wow, how do we get this? How do we get this far? So the effects of this process, when we are in a flow state, we get this sense of serenity. The negative self-talk tends to fall away because we're so totally involved in the activity. Maybe it's playing a game of tennis or reading an engaging book or just carrying on a rich conversation with a good friend. One source of stress during challenging times like COVID-19 and the epidemic is this sense of uncertainty. We just don't know what's going to happen next. Under those circumstances, time seems to really slow down. But when we're in a state of flow, the hours seem to pass like minutes. And this helps us, research indicates, cope with uncertainty. So what are some of those techniques? Well, make yourself do something that's challenging. When we become totally engaged in an activity, there is an optimal mix between challenge and skill. If the activity is too easy, it's difficult to get into flow. We may get bored. But if the challenge is too great, on the other hand, we can get frustrated. So find those things that challenge you at the right amount, like playing a musical instrument or a game of tennis, for me, or hiking in the mountains, or playing a game of chess. And of course, find these opportunities to do these flow creating activities with friends. And don't miss the opportunity to laugh and have fun with them. And speaking of friends, we're going to go to the next element of PERMA, which is R for positive relationships.
Steve, you're muted.
This comes. Okay, here's Ann Maston. We've already mentioned her before. She's a researcher on resilience who has identified the major role of positive relationships in resilience. She's a professor of child development at the University of Minnesota, and as a developmental psychologist, she's studying children over a period of many years. And she's clarified the importance of resilience and connection throughout the lifespan. So after reviewing thousands of research articles, identifying factors that contribute to resilience in children and young people, she's come up with what she calls the short list. These are the common factors that keep reappearing across all those studies that contribute to resilience. At the top of this list are those factors that involve positive relationships. Because she studies children, she includes effective caretaking and parenting and close relationships with other capable adults. And as these children age and become young adults, it is their close friends, peers, and then later older friends and romantic partners that provide the sustaining connections that we all need. In other words, throughout life, we rely on close positive relationships with others as a foundation for our resilience. Dr. Maston says that the prevalence of these factors indicates that there are fundamental adaptive systems that protect our development and functioning. These systems are not just in us, they are around us. And I'm going to say that again, because it's so important. These systems are not just in us, they are around us. So trying to be a rugged individual who goes it alone through tough times is not a good way to be resilient. You can draw on the capacity that's contained in your relationships to help you get through these tough times. Now let's hear from Dr. Maston.
So from a systems perspective, Resilience is dynamic. Your resilience and mine are always changing because our environment's always changing. We're developing and changing all the time. Everything we experience is changing us. So resilience is dynamic. It fluctuates over time. And the capacity for adaptation that you or I or anyone has is distributed across systems. You don't rely just on your, your own self, your own mind, your own body to respond to adversity. You can draw on the capacity that's embedded in your relationships, in your community, and I'll come back to that. And this means that the resilience of a single individual, like a child, is going to depend on the resilience in other systems, how much capacity they have to help out. So a child depends on the resilience of a family. Families depend on the resilience of communities and other families around them. Another implication of this kind of a systems perspective is that diverse pathways of adaptation are expected. And of course, they're observed as well. The course of development can be described as a pathway kind of over your life course, but it's also the case that the course of response to a challenge or adversity can be described as a pathway. Patterns of adaptive function vary over time in relation to adversity or challenges. And so people have talked about pathways of resilience. Here's some examples of pathways of resilience. On the left side is patterns that people have theoretically expected and also verified in many cases for acute onset trauma. And then on the right is a different kind of pattern in the context of severe, overwhelming, chronic adversity. I study children, and it's important to think about the chronic side as well. In the case of acute trauma, the three patterns people often discuss of resilience kinds of pathways, and these reflect the manifestations of resilience. Pattern A is often called stress resistance. Pattern B is usually breakdown and recovery. Pattern B is actually quite normative when in the case of acute overwhelming stress. And pattern C is usually described as post-traumatic growth. And that's been discussed much more, as you may be aware, as in older kids and adults rather than very small children.
So positive relationships are incredibly important to resilience. And in fact, as Steve and I were developing this presentation, we came back over and over again to the idea that positive relationships was not only the most important element in our estimation, but also it ties to all of the other elements very closely. So the effects of the positive relationships are that they build the support systems that allow us to be more resilient. By having a positive relationship with your family, with your friends, with your coworkers, these build in the systems that allow those people to come to our aid and help us when we're in trouble. And there's reciprocity there. We also have the ability and the responsibility to come to their aid when they need help. And what that does is it creates what are called secure attachments. And secure attachments are often, maybe most often, talked about in terms of children and their adult caretakers, where the child and the caretaker have a long-term trusted relationship where the child trusts and knows that they will be taken care of. And while these are incredibly important for development of children, secure attachments are also important for adults. There is much more reciprocity in the adult secure attachments, but knowing that you have a group of people that care about you, that will help you, that will take care of you when you need it, is incredibly important to resilience. So the techniques that can be used to enhance your positive relationships are listed here. The first is acts of kindness. And these can be, small things. It can be saying hello and thank you in the checkout line at the grocery store. It can be letting someone in ahead of you in a line of cars, or it can be big things, coming to the aid of someone who needs it, helping someone move, volunteering to work with New Mexico New. But all of these help build your relationships, small and large. And closely aligned with that is expressing admiration, appreciation, and affection, telling people how much you care about them, telling people that you admire them and value what they do, and telling them how what they've done to help you has really impacted your life and how much it's meant to you. These can make very, very strong relationships. A specific technique is called active constructive listening. And in this situation, it works best when you're the listener and someone is describing a positive thing that happened to them, something that they enjoyed or took great satisfaction in. And your job as the listener is to help them relive that experience, to ask leading questions like, well, what happened next? Or how did you get into that situation? Or how did it affect the people around you? Or to make comments that show that you're really involved. That must have made you feel good. How satisfying. Make eye contact. Be really involved. And this is very different from what we often do when we're listening, which is where we're trying to figure out what we're going to say. The point here is to help the individual that's speaking relive this positive thing. And finally, smile. There's lots of research that shows that smiling improves the mood of the person who smiles. But there's also lots of research that shows that smiling creates the likelihood that the person that sees you will also smile and that they will experience positive emotions too. So just the simple activity of smiling is a good way to enhance your relationships. So Steve, can you talk about meaning?
Sure can. And echoing your focus on the importance of positive relationships for all of the elements of PERMA, they also are a major contributor to the next element that we'll talk about, and that's meaning. According to Seligman, the meaningful life requires that we belong to and serve something bigger than ourselves. We know meaning is important because self-reports of meaning are associated with higher quality of life and decreased mortality. So where are the sources of meaning in our lives? Religious and cultural communities can provide meaning in the face of adversity and foster resilience. Membership in a religious or spiritual group can provide that connection to something bigger than self. However, tragic events can also lead believers to question their faith. When someone is able to overcome great difficulty or suffering, he or she may go through a transformational process that leads to a deepening sense that life has meaning and a new sense of their mission in life. One such individual was Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. In that book, he describes his experiences in a concentration camp. Frankl developed logotherapy to help others find meaning in their lives. And in doing so, he helped his clients focus less on themselves and more on higher level goals. However, moving too quickly to find meaning in the aftermath of a challenging event can be counterproductive. In the urgency of the moment, the event may just seem senseless. However, with the passage of time comes the ability to reflect and look back on a challenging event to discover where it may fit in to the bigger picture of your life. By now, I expect that you have learned that the most important source of meaning in our lives comes from relationships. Reaching out to others amid a challenging event to help them is a rich way to increase resilience for yourself and for others. So, as we've said, meaning is really important. The sense of meaning, that our life has meaning, may provide a buffer and help buffer the impact of traumatic events by allowing us to keep them in perspective. We're assured that our lives continue to matter and our existence matters to others. So some techniques. One tried and true technique is journaling. Somehow just getting a description of the event down on paper helps us distance from it. And as a result, we don't tend to ruminate about it. Rumination is a very destructive process when we just simply go over the same negative thoughts over and over again. So getting away from that is very important. Studies indicate that writing continuously for 20 or 30 minutes a day about a disturbing event for 4 consecutive days has real benefits as far as health and well-being are concerned. When they were measured, these effects were measured 4 months later. Another technique is to reestablish a sense of order in your life. It can be as simple as fixing something around the house, engaging in a familiar practice like yoga. Spiritual practices like meditation or prayer can also help restore a sense of equilibrium to your life in the face of uncertainty. And we can draw on our personal relationships in those times of challenge and difficulty. Appreciating the support we get from friends and strangers in the small tasks of daily living can increase our sense of gratitude.
And so now we're on to accomplishment, the last of the 5 elements of PERMA. And here you see the small child trying to push the automobile, which shows that throughout our lives, an important part of being human, of being satisfied with our lives, is acting to master our environment. Now, accomplishment is also called achievement, but Steve and I believe that accomplishment has more of a connotation of personal satisfaction, whereas achievement has more of a flavor of being acknowledged by others. And accomplishment really is about doing things that bring you satisfaction. Maston says this is experiencing delight or satisfaction in making things happen in the world. And so while meaning is often doing something that you may not want to do or you may not enjoy as much, but it brings value to other people, accomplishment is about doing things for yourself. And so the effects of accomplishment related to resilience are that accomplishing things restores that sense of mastery and control. And while we may not actually be in control, having a feeling of control is very important. Also, accomplishment helps build skills that allow us to access resources. One study that was done looked at communications that were knocked out after a storm in the New York City area. And the only communication technique that was available was cell phones. And this was early on in the adoption of cell phones. So for those people who had accomplished purchasing a cell phone and learning how to use it, they could access that system when other people who had not accomplished this could not. The other aspect, or the other important thing, is to have different areas of accomplishment. Bonanno talks about how he gets enjoyment from running. And when he was unable to run because of an injury, he found that there was a hole in his life, that he needed other ways of accomplishing things that brought him satisfaction. So some techniques are to do something that has an impact on your environment. And we mentioned like taking care of a plant. And especially if you're in a difficult time, choose small things. Choose something to do, promise yourself you're going to do it, then follow through. This helps get you momentum. And the reason why we mentioned caring for a plant is it was a study done with people who lived in a care facility, who were ill or disabled so that they couldn't take care of themselves. And plants were put in the rooms of the individuals who were being cared for. Some of those individuals were asked to water the plant and care for it, and others were told that the plant was there in their rooms to brighten their day and that it would be cared for by the people who ran the facility. So this was an experiment where they were looking at what the differences were between people having the responsibility of caring for the plant or not. And they found that the people who took care of the plant, who had that as a responsibility not only did better emotionally, but they did better physically. So even something that small can have an effect in your life. It's a great quote: do what you can with what you've got where you are. And I think this breaks it down very nicely. Realistically evaluate what you're able to do in your situation. That's the do what you can. With what you've got asks you to realistically look at your resources. What kinds of things can you use to support your activity? And finally, where you are asks you to look at the limitations and the boundary conditions for your activities. And so by realistically looking at these things, you can identify things that you can accomplish and that will bring you satisfaction. So now that we've gone through the 5 PERMA elements, Steve, can you pull this all together for us?
Thanks, Paul. I will need your help here as we do this. By the way, I love that last quote, a wonderful quote that does sum it up a lot. Those of you who attended our presentation on well-being in November, you recall the experience I shared of living in the Navajo Nation in New Mexico. In our school, there were foster grandparents who taught our students how to weave. For Navajos, weaving is a craft that contributes to the well-being of their families and communities. We suggested you might reflect on your life as a tapestry, with the warp, the strands stretched vertically through your composition, being the elements of well-being, or PERMA. The weft, the horizontal threads, consists of those daily choices that we all make about how to live our life. The result is a rich tapestry of your life, integrating these elements of well-being. Now we're going to add another element to our metaphor: resilience, the ability to handle the ups and downs of life. We suggest that it is the loom, the structure or system that holds your evolving composition in place. In the picture, you see the weaver. By the way, men as well as women are weavers. With the loom, the wooden elements holding the evolving rug in place. And if we really expand our metaphor outwards in terms of systems, in addition to the loom, the weaver relies on his or her family to herd and shear the sheep that provide the wool for the composition and provide care for the children, while the weaver is involved in weaving. So it's the whole community that contributes to the resilience of its members. So Paul.
Yeah, so thank you, Steve. So continuing with that metaphor, resilience is the loom. Resilience is the structure around the tapestry of your life. And the key that we want to bring to you is that you can enhance your resilience. It's not something that you're born with. Certainly there are innate characteristics that help, but you can create more resilience in your life. And you can do this by increasing your well-being. And the key to that is strengthening your connections, whether those are your connections to family and friends, or your connections to community, to your work. The ability to connect to the systems that are around you increases your resilience, and you can learn to enhance those.
So how many of us predicted that we would have to cope with the pandemic? And how many of us thought that we would still be learning how to do this for after 2, or I think it's been 3 years now? What are some of the lessons we have learned? And I'm going to borrow from Bonanno. Bonding with those close to us and relying on the support of others, minimizing our isolation. Hey, thanks for all of you who've come today. Yeah. Keeping in close contact with friends and family, be it through email, Zoom, phone, however you want to do it. And then to have a variety of coping techniques. I hope we've given you enough today to show you that there are a variety that you can use. Sometimes people will come up with a list of, say, 5 or 6 characteristics for being resilient. The problem is that those characteristics change depending on the situation we're dealing with. So it really helps to have a variety. And so if you're trying one and it doesn't work, you can switch to another one. And I guess to sum it up, the science of resilience tells us that we can cope with this and we don't have to do it all by ourselves.
Absolutely. And thanks, Steve. One of the things that we do at the end of all of our presentations about PERMA and about positive psychology is to ask you to think of ways that you could become an ambassador for well-being. Your well-being is increased by helping others. This isn't a selfish thing. This is actually the way that we're structured. We're social animals. So when we help others, we build the relationships with those others, and we increase our own well-being along the way. So think of how you could bring this knowledge that you've gotten today to your family, to your friends, to your community. So thank you very much. We would like to welcome questions and comments. And Ellen, if you could give us a summary of what's happened in the chat while we were talking, that would be great.
Okay, sure. I will say that not much has been happening, but a couple of comments just showed up. So okay. From Richard initially, and he was talking about the structures. Look, what are the structures in our lives, in everyone's lives, that holds things together for you as an individual? And I thought that was a really good question. And for me, I thought, I'm thinking COVID, and one of the things that was really important that I realized was connection. That really made that come through.
Absolutely, Ellen, you're right. And so it's primarily connections to people. And in fact, whether we're talking about connections to people or community, that's still connections to people. And an important thing to notice is that we have new resources to keep those connections alive. And we're using one of those today. Zoom and the internet technology that we have allows us to safely interact with people, even when there's an infectious disease out there. So there are lots of ways to connect, and there are new ways that we can connect. The systems, though, typically involve other people. Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I'm interested in how some of you who've listened as we've gone through the presentation, and we asked you to think about what has helped you in the past in terms of dealing with difficult and challenging situations. As you've gone through this material, what has this reminded you of? What were those elements of PERMA, positive relationships, positive emotions, engagement or connection, meaning or purpose, and accomplishment? Which one of those seem to work for you or have been helpful to you in getting through this COVID-19 situation? We'd love to hear from you. Anybody got something that comes right to mind?
Yeah, and I would say everybody feel free to unmute or raise your hand or type a question in the chat. We really encourage and invite engagement. That's what creates resilience, as you guys have been talking about today, is to actually, take a deep breath and chime in and participate. Definitely.
Yeah, I can share just for myself, some of the things that I found helpful in dealing with COVID-19 are things like, again, using Zoom. And actually, it's one of these positive things that's come out of the COVID situation, because my life partner and myself, she and I connect with our friends off in Boston. In fact, I think Mark might be here today attending this presentation, and we do it through Zoom. We actually have more connections now than we ever had before.
And Steve, we have a question.
Yes.
But you're muted.
I'm from Elke.
Elke.
There you go.
There.
Hi, Elke.
Yeah, there you go. Hi, and that's Elke and her husband, Michael. Welcome.
And Michael. And hello, everyone. And Steve, as you know, I've attended several of your workshops. And I think today the most outstanding aspect was, as Elke and I were looking at each other, we were talking about connections, and through that, the line of questioning, or at least asking questions. There was a time when I thought that Elke's asking questions of me regarding a situation was sort of like nagging, and did not see it as a positive. But understanding over time, and then especially today, it really reinforced the fact that there is an interest in enhancing our relationship. There is an interest in better understanding the situation, and it allows me then to think further through the circumstance and perhaps questions that I did not ask myself. So there was more of a clear understanding of self and the circumstance, and then recognizing there was support as well. So that's what I've taken from today, is just, yeah, those questions can be very, very valuable, and they're loving.
Nice.
So thank you both.
Great point. And and again, we're, I think, dealing too with the fact that everyone is resilient, maybe in a different way, or we can learn from each other's resilience. So, you know, what works for you may not work for someone else close to you. And by sharing that and going through the questioning process may help clarify that. Okay,
Yes.
This doesn't work for me. I'd like to find something that worked for both of us, or maybe these are times I see some more space for myself. You know, all of that I think is important, learning from each other. Great example.
So thank you again.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the things that came to mind as you were speaking, Michael, was what Fredrickson talks about in terms of the positive emotions allow us a broader perspective. And as you brought positive emotions into your life when these situations came up, that allowed you to look at the situation more broadly and see it in this perspective of, oh, well, this is something that enhances our relationships, whereas negative emotions would tend to focus you down on, oh, well, you know, I'm being nagged. So so that's another way that the research can perhaps speak to the situation that you experienced.
And if I may also say, one of the things Elke has challenged me with is whenever I have my negative emotions that come up, feeling grumpy or what have you, I now have a challenge to identify 3 positive aspects of what occurred, so it'll balance it out.
That's great. Yeah, I think we've got another question from Sarah.
Yes, I have. Well, hi, hey, Steve. I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you all. And I also was, when you were talking about communication and connection in my work, I'm lucky because I use Zoom and I'm remote. I've been remote before pandemic and for the most part, but I really was happy. I put in the comments to see teen years and I Googled them and oh, sorry guys. I'd heard about them and now I know more about them, but I'm thinking so many, when you're challenged technologically, and I will confess that I'm waiting for my Mac guy to help me with my Google password issue. But anyway, I think it's great that Teen Years is here and that they offer a way, I think, that covers so many of the elements you are all talking about: connection, and meaningful connection, and also the ability to better use our technological tools for connection. So I'm really happy to see they're there, and I really appreciate the whole presentation. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. That's great. And thanks New Mexico New for involving teen years in this effort, because I think, yeah, some of us who are really technologically challenged, you know, it's just so helpful to have. And I like somebody like teen years, and I like the mix of ages too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely.
Great.
I want to second everything that was said. Sarah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ellen.
Oh, I think, she was.
Sorry, I was muted. I was
Hey,
going to say
Trish.
something. Hey, thank you. Just wanted to say thank you guys because Dylan is awesome. She's one of our coaches that's on the call now. I love New Mexico New and the work that they're doing. And then I love this whole conversation. So this is like, even though I'm driving between meetings right now, I'm like, I have to tune in because I love when we do these. And I couldn't agree more with everything from our brilliant instructors today. So thank you for having us.
Yeah, and thank you. And we, as at New Mexico New, we make up, we consciously have partnered with Teen Years because of the multi-generational input. And I think that Trish started something that's just so needed in our community with, really healing that digital divide. So
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to point out that we're all technologically challenged now and then. The technology is so complex that it doesn't matter how
right.
deep your knowledge is, there will be times when you need help. And that's part of the systems that are out there to help us be resilient.
that's right.
So I think a couple of other people have their hands up with questions. Dorothy, do you want to unmute?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention the fact that this seems like a good practice to be healthy. And I don't want to minimize it, but when you really hit that wall, that it's kind of like a doctor. You want to be healthy and walk and do all the exercise and mental health things, but when you really hit a wall, you do need that professional help. And, that brings you back to the even keel that we have. Because I know in the worst traumas I've had to get help. And, this keeps me up there without needing it as much as I used to. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Really good point, Dorothy. The idea of getting mental health help. For instance, if somebody is experiencing some significant depression, it's going to be very hard to experience positive emotions. So getting some help, sometimes getting medication to deal with that can be helpful. So that's a very important point. Again, you're not expected to do it all on your own. And there are professionals that are available to help you. And those are great resources. And I guess one of the things we want to underline, and Paul, let me know what you think, is although we talk about people having extraordinary ability to be resilient, we also are not in any way suggesting that if you're not able to cope with the situation in what you feel to be a resilient way, there's something wrong with you, or that you're, reaching out and getting help is really the right thing to do. And we just have to have the basic systems working for us in order for us to be responsive and, deal with these situations. So great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dorothy. That's an excellent point. I agree with you, Steve. What we're talking about is not to replace therapy. It's for people who are emotionally healthy. If you are having difficulties, definitely find a professional that you feel comfortable with and that will help you. There are many effective treatments for virtually all emotional maladies. So yes, go and get that help. And that's another one of those systems that you can rely on to help you when you need it.
Definitely. So I believe, Clara, you had your hand up for a bit ago. If I'm putting you on the spot, you're still
No, you're not. It was Steve's question. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
That's something that really helped me during this pandemic and studying PERMA was under relationships. It was, I think, originally posed as what is your area you want to put some attention on, maybe your weakest, and it was relationships. And I just wanted to have stronger relationships. And when Steve talked about, I think it was Steve, about active constructive listening. It was sort of a term that I never heard of. And it was fascinating to me. And I realized that I was doing what I think a lot of people do in this world, which is, thank you very much. That's so nice of you to say that. I was not actively listening to the point where I could say something that was much more authentic than all the things that we say. Like, isn't that awesome? I think that word is so overused. So I started working on it, and I realized it takes work. It takes work to sort of come back with another rejoinder that is meaningful, that's authentic, that makes you realize that you have put effort into it. Of course, what happens is it deepens the relationship. It's an act of kindness, so it's an act of love, so it's a way to bind your roots of your tree with other roots of trees, people. And I just wanted to pass it on because that is something that came out of what Steve said today. It helps others to relive their experience, if it's an experience they're talking about. And it means that you really are involved. And I want that more. Thank you very much.
Great. Clara, that was actually Paul who talked about
Was
that.
that Paul? I apologize, Paul.
That's okay.
I'm honored to be confused with Steve. Thank you.
I'm honored to be with both of you.
Let's see, I think
I think
Mark
Larry,
or
Larry's next.
Larry's
Yeah.
next.
Oh, hi, everybody. I had a conversation with a dear friend yesterday. We were reflecting on our aging parents and their mortality. His parents passed away some years ago. Mine are in an elder care situation. And in asking about him, about what he sort of learned or reflected on that, he pointed out that his relationship with his siblings got much stronger during the process of taking care of the parents. And it just hit me like bricks that that is absolutely what's happening for me. I'm talking to my siblings more than ever. We're crashing at each other's house. We're taking turns doing stuff for mom and dad. And that, you know, when I think about my loom with, you know, the element of family and the caregiving aspect has definitely enriched my life, my relationships with that family, and my resilience for sure.
Boy, yeah, that sense of meaning, that sense that you're really doing something that contributes so richly. Yeah, the interconnection of all of those elements, I think, Larry, yeah, what a great example.
yeah, that is a great example. And you're talking about how coming together to help your parents has brought you closer together with your siblings. You know, that's a wonderful example about how you as a system are coming together to help each other and help your parents.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
So Mark, yeah, you can unmute.
Okay. I did unmute.
Thank you. You
Yes,
did
and we can hear you, Mark.
It's such a delight to listen to. This is the third of your workshops that I've attended, and you guys are just getting better and better.
Well, thank you.
And I want to put a word in about meaning. It's difficult to figure that one out, I think. And yet I've worked hard on it for quite a few years. And especially when you're a senior and you're retired, you have the time to do something like that you might not have when you're younger, including taking care of your parents. Larry, I really appreciate your comments. But spending the time to relate values and the wisdom traditions, which are really foundational for people like Barbara Fredrickson and Viktor Frankl, who was mentioned. They weren't positive, well, Barbara Fredrickson says, but Viktor Frankl was not a positive psychologist. But the underpinnings of those things and these wisdom traditions are very meaningful and can be related, I think, in a direct way to your daily family, friends, and community by looking at the values that they speak to you about and modernizing them. Because after all, the ancients had lived in a different world, but the world we live in today, there's lessons to be learned from that. And that's something you can turn to. That's one thing you could turn to. And it's not that hard. It doesn't have to be that complicated.
Yeah, I think that's a great comment, that all of these things don't have to be complicated. You know, that they're accessible to each of us.
Let's see, I think it says Dan Noor, but I'm sure that's not your first name. I believe it's Sharon. Am I remembering correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct. That's correct.
Hi, Sharon.
Thank you. Hello. I would like to say that I feel that my resilience has waxed and waned over the years. I can recall a time when I was quite a bit younger, actually much younger, and we were in a rather strong earthquake in Southern California. And the way that we bricks fell off of the houses and freeways were downed and you couldn't go anywhere. And our husbands couldn't go into work. We were all young couples with babies. And it was interesting because none of us, I don't think, thought in our heads what we were doing is what you all have been talking about. But we band together once the guys could get back to work. All of the wives band together, brought our babies to one house, and we would start picking up bricks outside the home that we were in and chiseling off the mortar and loading up our trucks and taking them to locations where someone was going to build something or do something. It was just like a matter of surround yourself with love and friends and physical activity and something to do. But over the years, I've noticed in lots of different situations, I've maybe more isolated myself. And so my resilience has not been as strong or as present. The spiritual connection. But I have found that I have become more introverted, less seeking others around me. And I think that what you have said today is that there is definitely a positive effect in having connections with other people, so you can draw strength from one another. I hope to improve that.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. And the example that you gave was one in which the whole community was affected. And so that may have been easier for everyone to come together and be involved, where, you know, often traumas and difficulties are individual things where we're dealing with an injury or, you know, something within our family. And so, you know, that also is another way that our resilience can vary over time because of the nature of what we're dealing with. So thank you. That's a good example.
Yeah, and I think your point is so important, that resilience actually, and Maston talks about your resilience can vary almost moment to moment. If you wake up with a serious cold, or of course we know COVID-19, you know, it affects your ability to cope with a lot of things, and you deal with that and you resolve that. But I think you're taking the longer term view, and you're really doing something that is an example of this flexibility mindset that we learned from George Bonanno is so important. As what works for us at one stage in our life may not work as well at another stage or another situation. So, you know, you look at other options and find what worked before, and maybe you come up with something new. And actually, as people age, there is some evidence that people may have fewer but richer connections with others. Fewer people, but they have much deeper relationships. The downside with that is that, of course, as you get older, some of these people fall by the wayside. So if you can engage with other people, and in fact, engage with the younger people. Here we have teen years, you know, to get a variety of different ages that can really give you some the different options in life. I think the more we can think about those options and being aware of them consciously, I think that's part of what we're saying in this presentation, is to try to be a bit more conscious about it. in making some of these choices to, yeah, I'm going to reach out. I'm going to connect with someone where maybe I wouldn't have done that before. When you're right in the emergency, it will happen so fast, you won't have probably much time to be conscious about it. But if you've laid the foundation and you've modified your foundation, so over time the house shifts a little bit, you're probably set for the long-term view. Paul?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think you summed it up very well. Thank you very much for the contribution.
Yes.
I think that one of the things I know in my life I've done that helps with my resilience is to set my intention and source then from what's possible and really reach for that and keep that in mind, even though it may be something that I'm going through that's challenging or difficult. Still, if you have an intention that you're trying to achieve, I have found too that helps. But
yeah, absolutely.
So I want to turn to Tracy, I believe, has a question.
One more question.
Paul and Steve, thanks so much for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. It was awesome.
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to share with the group and with you both that I think too, resilience grows through trial. And
Tracy, put your microphone down by your mouth.
Sorry, thank you. I put it up earlier today. I was in a different meeting. Thank you. I just wanted to say that resilience comes from all of those trials and all of those experiences in life that you go through. And as we go through those seasons of change in our lives, sometimes we have to recall why we have the resilience we do, what gave us that strength and built that bond, if you will. Mine was military community for 25 years, going through so many different experiences with that population. They were my family. And now I haven't had that after retirement. So I've had to find another way to build relationships and find that same community. It's been difficult because military life is so very different than civilian life. And those friendships you make aren't necessarily as deep or strong because you're not put under those same pressures and those same trials, if you will. So getting out there and finding friendships that are meaningful. And like you said, Steve, as we age too, we have fewer friendships. They're richer and deeper, but not as many, where I had hundreds of them before. So stopping that comparison of what I was when I was in my 30s and 40s and 50s, now taking them through my 60s and beyond, so that I know that, yes, I have the resilience, I have the strength. I just need to make sure that I have the community to support me through these things.
And that's in New Mexico New. That's what we're trying to create, is another structure that will help people create that new relationships. Because when you're in the military, you had all that structure, or we go to work every day, your structure's there for you. It's a lot easier, right, to stay engaged. But
yeah,
so that's one of the covenants underneath New Mexico New, is to give a structure so that we can socially engage as we age. So
it's awesome. Definitely. And have a place for people to go to for many different purposes, be it this kind of learning program, Never Stop Learning. We want to know what people want. And also working very hard right now to create an app that connects people to work and volunteer opportunities, and to be a resource for people in New Mexico who are 50 plus, so that it's not so challenging and difficult to get engaged and to connect. So yeah, thanks, Paula. That's a good segue. So you guys, thank you so much. I just love your presentations. I can't wait to see more and what comes for the future. We do want to mention a couple of events that with partners, including CAP and the Creative Aging. Clara Farah, I believe I don't know if she's still on. I'm not seeing her right now on my screen, but she's going to be teaching a class that starts on the 2nd of February, How to Live Your Best Life. It is through ENMU. And if you are interested in registering for this class, let's see, Paula, if you scroll down just a little bit, there's a link there.
We can put the link in the
Yeah,
Zoom.
there it is, riadosa.enmu.edu/CE.
There we go.
So yeah, we can put that in the chat also for everyone to take a look at. And then there is a $30 fee for that class, which is really minimal. It I think ends on April the 20th, I believe is what that said. There's another event that Modern Elder Academy, which is now headquartered here in New Mexico, is offering online during these COVID times. They're calling it a retreat at home experience. If you register before January or by January 31st, you get a 25% discount, which is pretty significant. I think it's $250.
Yes.
So they also offer scholarship programs. So if it's a course you're interested in and you can't afford what they're asking, we do encourage you to reach out to them. So that's also posted. The link for that is posted in the chat box.
Yeah, and I'll just say I took this 8-week class right when I was leaving Oracle. I say I left and went into semi-retirement on this last August after a 40-year career in high tech. And taking this 8-week course really helped me figure out and be conscious about what is the path I'm on, what is the transition I'm in, because I could have done it very unconsciously. And as we've learned this morning, it's better to be a lot more conscious about the steps we're taking. So I recommend it.
And then finally, we'll be offering our next online event on February the 24th. And we're very excited to bring another local New Mexican to the table, Julianne Neely, who for 30 years has been teaching guided movement class. She has a very unique approach. Paula can chime in again about this because she's been working with Julie herself for years now.
Yeah, she's one of the reasons I walked today.
So she's going to guide us through unique movement exercises that you can do at home or do at your desk. It's designed to unlock body wisdom, to revitalize your movement and reboot the nervous system. And it's very interesting to hear her speak about how she teaches movement. I'm personally really looking forward to that class.
Yes.
So if you want to register, you can see the link in the chat, or you can also go to our website and on the event page, registration is up. And I'm just briefly going to mention in March, we're really happy to bring back Dr. Riley White from UNM Anderson School of Management. He's going to be teaching once again about financial wellness, financial literacy, especially for people in the sandwich generation, 50 to 70 who are caring for both maybe younger adults and or grandchildren, or also their parents, and experiencing how that affects us financially and some of the things we can plan for and do about that. So thank you once again to Paul and Steve. This was just fantastic. And to all of you for attending with us today. And we hope to see everyone again at our next event in February.